Up next in the broadcast, fear of a nationwide outbreak of the H5N8 bird flu virus grows as more confirmed cases pop up around the country. Pyongyang's recent peace offensive may appear to be a step in the right direction, but U.S. Deputy Secretary of State William Burns sees it as an early indicator of provocations soon to come. And 3 years after the Arab Spring, we ask our Middle East expert about how the region's democracy initiatives are developing and whether to expect sustained peace. Primetime News begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Tuesday, January 21st here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I am Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin this evening with the latest on the bird flu outbreak here in Korea.
The number of confirmed cases is growing, raising fears that the virus may have already spread nationwide. Our Kwon Soa has the latest.
Fears of a nationwide bird flu outbreak in Korea are growing. Disease prevention authorities said Tuesday that they suspect a duck farm in the southern city of Jeongeup in Jeollabuk-do Province has been infected with avian influenza. If their suspicions prove true, it would be the first case of AI outside of Gochang and Buan counties, the source of the recent AI outbreaks, and would mean that the risk of birds carrying the virus to other places has increased. With that in mind, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs announced Tuesday that all ducks within a 3-kilometer radius of the infected farms will be culled. That's a much wider area than the 500-meter radius set earlier, but for now, the order excludes chicken. Earlier in the day, authorities confirmed that the number of poultry farms in Buan and Gochang that have ducks infected with the highly pathogenic H5N8 strain of avian influenza has risen to 4. The same strain of the virus was confirmed in a group of wild ducks found dead in a reservoir near a poultry farm in Gochang on Monday. Officials say this, as well as several more suspicious cases, including a recent one on Jeju Island, increases the chance that migratory ducks are the source of the bird flu outbreak. More specifically, they are pointing to a type of duck called the Baikal teal, which fly in from Russia to Korea for the winter. Korea has a total of 37 wintering sites for migratory birds. The Ministry of Environment has said it will track the Baikal teal's route via GPS to calculate the possibility of a further virus spread. Meanwhile, sales of poultry products have dropped significantly over the last couple of days, which is raising concerns in the distribution industry ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday. Health authorities say, however, that there is a very slim chance that the infected products have or will enter the market, and even if they do, the virus is destroyed once cooked at 75 degrees Celsius for at least 5 minutes. Kwon Soa, Arirang News.
And over now to the worst ever data leak in Korean history. The country's financial institutions in question are struggling to placate thousands of angry customers who are concerned their personal information may have fallen into the wrong hands.
The Korean government on Wednesday will unveil countermeasures to prevent such cases from happening again. But will it be tough enough when those guilty may include bank workers themselves? Our Chi Myung-gil explains.
Thousands of angry customers swarmed into their banks for a second straight day on Tuesday to get their credit card details changed and to file complaints about the credit card firm's mismanagement of their personal information. Their actions follow in the wake of what has become one of the biggest information leaks in the nation's history, with up to 20 million people in Korea having been affected.
I've been waiting here for more than an hour and I'm dumbfounded by the whole situation. Financial institutions are responsible for protecting our assets and personal information, not leaking it. They should compensate for any damages that customers may incur.
Concerns arising that customers' information may have fallen into the hands of scammers, with reports emerging that suspicious and unintended financial transactions have been made on accounts.
The leak is one of the worst in the country's history, with the personal data, bank account details, addresses, and credit ratings of millions of people now out in the open.
The three card firms KB Kookmin Card, NH Nongyap Card, and Lotte Card said they will fully cover any financial losses suffered by their customers from scams linked to the data leak. On Wednesday, the government will announce a set of preventive measures to stop similar data leaks from occurring, as well as toughened penalties for those involved in leaking data. These are expected to include stronger monitoring of staff at financial companies involved in customer data management, tougher regulations to prevent financial firms from sharing client data with their affiliates, and stronger punitive measures on financial institutions and their executives in case of data leaks. This information leak comes less than 1 month after the personal data of some 130,000 Standard Chartered Bank Korea and Citibank Korea customers was stolen. Jeongeup, Arirang News.
And meanwhile, the number of bogus websites pretending to be financial agencies has jumped 79-fold in just 2 years.
The Korea Internet and Security Agency says the total of websites that dupe people into revealing their bank or credit card information in the January to November period last year was over 5,800 compared to 74 in 2011. The number is up nearly 40% from a year ago. A KISA official advised users not to connect to unidentified links on social media sites and avoid making micro payments. Independent lawmaker An Chol-soo now says his new political party will launch in March in time for the upcoming local elections in June.
Speaking at a press conference on Tuesday, Yoon Yeol-jun, co-chair of An's new politics committee, said a preparatory body to oversee the party's formation will be established sometime next month. This means the June 4th local elections are lining up to be a three-way competition between the ruling and main opposition parties and An's new party. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State William Burns, who is in Seoul to discuss challenges posed by the North Korean leadership, expressed concerns about Pyongyang's recent peace offensive.
Instead of a sign of hope, he said it could be an early indicator of provocations to come. Hwang Sung-hee has more.
North Korea has seemingly been on a peace offensive in the new year, but visiting U.S. Deputy Secretary of State William Burns says the regime's tendency to have a sudden change of heart worries Washington.
Well, I think the United States and our friends here in the Republic of Korea share a lot of concern about the recent behavior of the DPRK leadership and the dangers of further reckless behavior and provocation in the future, as I said.
There was a dramatic change in Pyongyang's attitude towards Seoul after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's once powerful uncle, Chang Song-taek, was executed late last year. Following its proposal last week to end all cross-border slandering, Pyongyang has persistently expressed a strong will to improve inter-Korean ties. South Korea scoffed at the offer, with President Park Geun-hye telling the government to remain vigilant as the North engages in its propaganda offensive. After a meeting with South Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Kim Kyu-hyun in Seoul on Tuesday, Burns reaffirmed Washington's commitment to its ally.
I express once again the strong American support for President Park's principled approach to the DPRK and stressed once again the strong American support for the defense and security of the Republic of Korea.
The U.S. diplomat is expected to discuss the current state of North Korea with officials in China before moving on to Japan, where the country's denials of historical wrongdoings will be taken up. Once Burns wraps up his trip, U.S. Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs Daniel Russell, who will accompany Burns in China and Japan, will visit Seoul on Sunday to share the results of the discussions in Beijing and Tokyo. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
The Korean trade official who was kidnapped in the Libyan capital of Tripoli on Sunday is safe, according to an official from Korea's foreign ministry, though he did not specify how the information was obtained.
The official added that the government is preparing for any scenario but cannot say whether the act was politically motivated. Han Seo-gu, the head of the local branch of the state-run Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, was abducted by 4 armed men on his way home from work on Sunday evening local time. The identity of Han's abductors is not yet known, but there's speculation that al-Qaeda may be involved.
before your day ends and another begins. Get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features
restrictions is on the rise.
closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature circumstances that
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
the United States, the latest report, less than a
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
meeting came on to news trying to cover up the South.
As part of her state visit to Switzerland, President Park Geun-hye visited a local vocational school in the capital city of Bern on Tuesday to benchmark Switzerland's education system. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Jin-ju, who is traveling with the president, tells us how the Korean leader hopes to learn about how to create a more specialized workforce.
Switzerland is well known for its educational system, which is based heavily on apprenticeship. The youth unemployment rate in Switzerland stands at 7%, the lowest level among OECD countries, despite its relatively low college entrance rate. This is because most high school students are trained in vocational schools called Berufsschule, where they spend 3 to 4 days a week in companies, gaining experience in industrial settings. President Park, together with President of the Swiss Confederation, Didier Burkhalter, visited one of the vocational schools in Bern on Tuesday and took part in classes on computer engineering. The school provides some 60 courses from construction and mechanical technology to metalcraft and even bicycle repair. More than 80% of graduates are gaining employment. The presidential office of Cheongeup explains that the intent of the president's visit to the school was to benchmark the systematic vocational training system of Switzerland and to seek ways to bring together the strong points of the Korean and Swiss educational systems to foster specialized personnel that work well within the creative economy. An MOU was signed between the two nations during President Park's state visit to provide graduates of Korean vocational high schools or Meister schools who are employed at Swiss companies operating in Korea the opportunity to receive vocational training in Switzerland for a year. President Park will be making an opening speech on the creative economy and entrepreneurship in the first session of this year's World Economic Forum in Davos. She will also meet with the CEOs of global companies like Qualcomm, Aramco, and Siemens to call for further investment in Korea. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News, Bern.
And it seems the Syria peace talks in Switzerland will go ahead as planned after all. The main opposition group in Syria, which threatened to pull out of the meeting after the UN invited Iran, has confirmed it will attend. Well, this after the UN withdrew its controversial offer. Our Park Ji-won tells us more.
UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon withdrew his invitation for Iran to attend the much-anticipated peace talks on Syria, set to begin in Switzerland this week, after Iran refused to accept a 2012 Geneva deal calling for a transitional government for Syria.
The Secretary-General is deeply disappointed by Iranian public statements today that are not at all consistent with that stated commitment. Given that it has chosen to remain outside that basic understanding, he has decided that the one-day Montreux gathering will proceed without Iran's participation.
The UN's controversial last-minute decision to invite Iran had threatened to jeopardize the talks before they had even started, as Syria's main opposition group, the Syrian National Coalition, said it would not participate in the talks unless Iran, one of the Assad regime's major backers, was disinvited, and Tehran stopped exerting a military influence over Syria. After the UN withdrew Iran's invitation, the Syrian National Coalition confirmed its participation at the peace talks.
The National Coalition welcomes the decision of the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, in withdrawing the invitation that was sent to Iran. The National Coalition also would like to confirm its attendance to Geneva II conference and its participation in it.
The peace talks, involving some 30 countries, are scheduled to begin Wednesday in Montreux, Switzerland. On Friday, talks between the Syrian government and opposition delegations will continue in Geneva. More than 100,000 people have been killed and millions more displaced since the Syrian conflict broke out some 3 years ago. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Staying in the Middle East, Iran began shutting down its most sensitive nuclear operations as part of its preliminary nuclear deal with world powers, which immediately responded by lifting sanctions. Well, Korea was no exception. It will resume oil imports that stopped in July last year. Our Shin Se-min reports.
Korea will no longer have to cut its purchases of crude oil from Iran after the European Union and the United States suspended a range of sanctions on the Middle Eastern country on Monday. Korea is one of the countries to be eligible for Iran's sanction exceptions under the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act. Korea depends on imports for its oil needs, and Iran is a major supplier. The eased sanctions will also allow Seoul to import petrochemicals and export automobile parts that have been banned since last July. The move is expected to bring Korean companies about $100 million. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed Monday that Iran has begun shutting down parts of its nuclear program. The agency said that Tehran has stopped production of uranium with a concentration of above 5% and had begun diluting its stockpile of 20% enriched uranium. Iran can now benefit from the easing of sanctions worth up to $7 billion, including recovering frozen oil revenues worth some $4.2 billion. The eased sanctions will only be effective for 6 months, giving the world powers time to negotiate a final deal with Iran. The action eases the restrictions on trade in petrochemicals, gold, and precious metals, and on the provision of the insurance for oil shipments. The interim deal was struck in Geneva in November last year after months of talks between Iran and the 5 UN Security Council members and Germany. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
It's been 3 years since the start of the Arab Spring ushered in revolts and toppled regimes, but has the political chaos and even military coups brought about the intended democratic transformation?
On our news in-depth tonight, we look into the current situation unfolding in the Middle East, from Egypt to Syria and Iran, with Dr. Chang Ji-hang, Director of Middle East and North Africa Center at Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Chang, let's start with the unrest in Egypt. Nearly 3 years have passed since Mubarak had been ousted. Egypt seems to have come full circle with the overwhelming support of its new constitution, but would you say it's in the clear, or does it have many unresolved issues that remain?
I would say that the country is very dangerously polarized under the military-backed government. I mean, last week, the country approved a referendum on a new constitution, and obviously the military-backed government and Army Chief LCC will use that result as a source of their legitimacy. However, it was a highly, controlled exercise, not a real choice or consensus-based, result. So the country will remain very polarized without, pluralism or democracy.
Well, now to Syria. The much-delayed peace talks were set to be held in Switzerland. Will we see much progress in the talks that could bring an end to the civil war?
Unlike international anti-Assad coalition members, the Assad backers, such as Russia, Iran, and China, continue to see Assad in power. And even among the anti-Assad coalition members, there's no really solid agreement. For instance, Saudi Arabia and other Sunni GCC countries do not take strong stance against the Islamic jihadists.
Well, Iran's nuclear deal started today, and that involves the nation cutting back on uranium enrichment activities. Do you think this deal will work in the long run?
I would say up to a point. The deal was really significant first step toward the comprehensive agreement. And the Hassan Rouhani, the reformist new president, adopted a very pragmatic and flexible strategy at the negotiation table. But the deal is quite limited, only focusing on diluting the current program. The U.S. was able to get the initial deal. And also, Iran's president, Hassan Rouhani, has very limited foreign policy making power. All the final decisions only made by, Supreme Leader Khamenei.
Well, nowadays the term Arab Spring has an air of pessimism to it, but despite doubts, will we have something to celebrate when the 4th anniversary of Arab Spring comes around?
I will say, I don't know, maybe or maybe not, because toppling dictatorship does not really necessarily lead to, smoother democratic transitions. Revolutions are much easier to take place compared to post-revolution transition process. The current Arab countries need more, democracy-friendly factors such as more professionalized military staying out of politics and more moderate Islamic organizations with the experience of negotiations and settlement, and more able bureaucrats with the state traditions, and finally, no abundant oil resource. Oil resources are not really conducive to democracy in the region.
All right, well said. Thank you so much, Dr. Chang, for your time tonight.
Thank you.
South Korea is sending the most athletes it has ever sent to the Winter Olympics.
A ceremony will be held to honor those on their way to Sochi, and Stephen Che joins us with the details. Stephen.
Hey guys, thanks to the growing interest in winter sports and hard-working athletes dedicated to their craft, South Korea will send its largest ever delegation to the upcoming Winter Games. A total of 64 athletes are headed to Sochi, with 25 of them being speed skating and short track skaters. They're also representing the nation in figure skating, skiing, curling, the bobsleigh, and others. The delegation will be recognized at a ceremony at the National Training Center on Thursday. And moving on to football, the South Korea men's national team has wrapped up training camp in Brazil and now heads to the U.S. There, manager Hong Myung-bo will have his squad sharpen up their skills ahead of 3 friendlies against Costa Rica, Mexico, and the U.S. before returning in early February. He's looking for key role players to round out his World Cup roster. And heading to the Australian Open, the temperatures may have dropped in Melbourne, but the heat was still on in the first day of quarter-final matchups. It was no sweat for China's Li Na and Canada's Eugenie Bouchard, who cruised by their opponents Flavia Pennetta and Anna Ivanovic, respectively. And on the men's side, there was a pair of upsets. Novak Djokovic fell to Stan Wawrinka in an epic battle, while Thomas Berdych beat David Ferrer to advance. And moving on to Tuesday's KBL matchup, the LG Sakers visited the Mobis Phoebus in Ulsan. Now, Mobis comes in having won 2 of 3 matchups this season, but LG starts by pounding the paint and takes a 5-point lead into the half. Now in the second half, Davon Jefferson continues to dominate inside for LG. Despite a fourth quarter push, Mobis can't make the comeback, and LG takes this one 69-67. And that does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
It was another cold winter day with high levels of toxic dust and heavy snowfall throughout the nation.
For details, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, fill us in.
Good evening, guys. Heavy snowfall advisories have been issued in the Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-buk-do provinces, as well as the mountains of Jeju. Now, the mountains on the island are forecast to get another 5 to 10 centimeters, while the Gangwon-do and east coast of Gyeongsang-do will get between 1 and 5 more centimeters. Other regions in Gyeongsang-do will get less than a centimeter. Taking a look at the current conditions, the east coast regions are under the influence of a low pressure trough, which is why we're seeing clouds move in as snow. Now, a fine dust warning was issued in Seoul as of 10 p.m. and numbers say that Seoul is getting 142 micrograms per cubic meter of fine dust, which is about 3 times the normal levels. Otherwise, temperatures will get back to the seasonal average range starting tomorrow afternoon. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul starts off the day at -9 degrees with a high of 2. Meanwhile, Daegu and Busan reach 5 and 7 degrees respectively. Moving on to other regions, Jeju makes it to 6 degrees while Dokdo and Kumgang peak at 3 and -4 degrees respectively. Well, that's all I have for you this hour, but I'll be back with more updates after midnight.
And that's a broadcast on this Tuesday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.